Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Terrace Talk. Norwich City host Wolverhampton Wanderers at Carrow Road this weekend. Norwich City in a nice bit of form at the moment, which is good to see. I'm delighted that joining us to preview this weekend's game is Norwich City fan Anna Say and Wolves reporter for the Express and Star, Liam Keane. I want to start the show just by thanking my stand-in hosts for the last couple of weeks. I've obviously been off on holiday, so thank you to my colleagues Dave Freezer and Adam for stepping in. I don't think I missed much anyway, so it's all good. I jest, of course. Anna, let's come to you first, because we were talking off air just a minute ago. Norwich City fans maybe in a slightly odd position in Premier League terms. Back-to-back victories, the first time that's happened in a few years. Obviously, a new head coach at the helm as well. People seem to be smiling at the moment, which is nice.
Yeah, I was going to say it says a lot about how Norwich have been doing when you say that 2 wins is good form. But no, it's exciting, and I just hope that we haven't got any kind of false hope, because everyone already is really bought into Dean Smith and good old Shakespeare. We're as hard as it was letting go of Farker, we're ready for a new start, new regime, and we're looking positive now. And next one up against Wolves, got to keep the run going, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, I can't even recall to you the last time Norwich City won 3 Premier League games on the spin. I think you'd probably have to go back to maybe the 90s for that to be the case, during the glory years for Norwich City in European football. So what sort of opportunity is this weekend, straight off the bat, before we kind of reflect on Southampton a little bit later? Wolves obviously 6th in the Premier League, as we'll get onto with Liam, in a pretty good shape. I mean, fancy this as an opportunity, don't they, now, given back-to-back home games, as I said, an opportunity to build on their 2 wins.
Absolutely. This is, well, I think we all know, players included, that it's going to be a tough match. However, it's a great opportunity to make a statement. We've got a couple of good wins now. We've got some momentum behind us. We've got that new manager bounce, as cliche as it is. It seems like it to be a real thing. So, and we're at home as well, and the fans will have a bit of optimism. They'll have a good voice with them. So it's a real opportunity to get something done and kind of send a message to the rest of the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely, Anna. You're right there. Liam, maybe it says a lot about Norwich City that we're talking about back-to-back wins as being positive form and a lot of optimism. Obviously, for Wolves fans, it must feel slightly bizarre for Norwich to be speaking about it, given you guys currently 6th in the Premier League on 19 points. Seem to be in form as well at the moment. Just kind of sort of bring us up to date on where Wolves are currently in their season, because it seems to be a pretty good place.
Yes, certainly. I mean, very quickly on that, there's no easy games in the Premier League. Wolves found that out when Huddersfield a couple of seasons ago won. I think it was 3 games all season, and 2 of them were against Wolves. So you can't count any game off or write any game off, and that goes against the big teams as well. So Wolves are in a good position, certainly, as you say. We've got ourselves to a point where we're overachieving a little bit now. I think the squad is very talented, but probably not quite big enough. It needs a couple of additions, mainly for depth, really. You look at midfield and they've got 3 senior central midfielders. I think they need at least another one in there. So that's the biggest concern, really, is the depth. But there's a lot of talent there. I think Bruno is trying to change the style from Nuno, which takes a bit of time. And with that has come inconsistency. So they've gone away to Palace, for example, who have been doing fairly well, but were very poor that day. Ironically, actually, their away form has not been quite as good as their home form, which might have a bit of hope for Norwich. But the inconsistency is the biggest thing, and he's ground out some results in games where they haven't quite been at their best as well. So there's promise to come, but it feels like they're overachieving a little bit at the moment. I think overall as a season, if they can get top 10, I think that's a pretty successful season, considering they've had the manager change, the squad needs additions, and they're trying to just change the style and the way they're playing, which they're doing fairly well, but it's a long way to go. There's a little bit of work to do still.
It's interesting you mentioned consistency. That probably shows in the league table, doesn't it? Although Wolves are 6th, they've played 12 games, won 6 and lost 5, drawn 1. It seems to be kind of all or nothing with Wolves this season. Is that kind of a fair reflection on things?
Yeah, I think so. I think they, the first 3 games they played very, very well and lost all 3. So, to Leicester, Spurs, and United. It was unfortunate, they arguably against all 3 of them, but particularly the latter 2 against Spurs and United, they should have won those 2 games. They were by far the better team and came away after 3 games with 3 losses. And Wolves fans were concerned at that point because they played some good football, very attacking on the front foot and not getting the points they need. And then they regressed, I say, it might not be the right word, but slightly in the sense that they weren't quite as on the front foot and attacking in the games that followed, but then they started getting results, going away to Watford and winning, getting that result away at Villa, which was a big result, having been pretty poor for 80 minutes and it's come back to win 3-2. And then the home form has been very good. They had a good spells in the game against Newcastle, but then had a habit of letting them back into the game. Against Everton in the first half, they probably had the best football I've seen at Molineux, particularly, actually in general with Wolves, probably for a good few years. They were excellent. And then against West Ham, actually in that game, the second half, they then struggled. And then against West Ham for 60, 70 minutes, they were brilliant, allowed West Ham back into the game. So that's where the inconsistency comes in as well. It's not just the results, it's also within performances. So they'll have a good half or they'll have a good, 20, 25 minutes, and then they'll struggle for a little bit. They sit back and they allow the other team to have the ball and they invite pressure, and that's where the problems would come from. Fortunately, in those games, Everton and West Ham, they held on for the victory still, otherwise it wouldn't quite be as rosy as it is at the moment. But if they can find the consistency throughout a game as well as the results, they'll have a very good season. And that was the good sign from West Ham because not only did they dominate a team that has done very well this season, but they came out in the second half after a good first half and continued that form or that performance until they got the goal. Then they fell into the same habits, granted, which will give Norwich potentially an opportunity on Saturday. But they're getting there. I think that's the takeaway really, is that they finally get in where they need to be. And that's why I say overachieving, because I think they've still got work to do, but somehow they're still 6th. So it's been pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, Anna, what Liam says there about inconsistency and maybe how he broke down performances. It's fair to say Norwich probably haven't produced a 90-minute performance of their own yet. We've kind of seen 45-minute bursts in the last couple of games. You'd probably say the first half against Brentford and the second half against Southampton. If you could maybe stitch those 2 halves together, you'd have a very, very good Premier League performance. Is that the next challenge for Dean Smith, to try and get a Norwich City team to produce a 90-minute performance rather than maybe a 45 one or spells within games?
Absolutely. I think the 2 performances came with very different reasons, and the Brentford performance second half, you're probably thinking they played like a team that was 45 minutes away from their first win of the season, which they really needed, and that's why it probably looked quite shaky. First half against Southampton, it was nerves. Fans were nervous. We knew that Smith, it was important to hit the ground running, so that came with apprehension. The players were playing with only a few days under a new regime, so there was probably a sense of being nervous, wanting to get that win, but also kind of trying to get used to the new manager so quickly. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they play in the next game, considering that Smith will have had a full week with them now, because against Southampton, I think, especially in the second half, we were just starting to see a few little things of Smith's style and Shakespeare's style and what they want to do, how they want to implement things. I think that we could really start to see that against Wolves, and if it's anything like that second half, I think could be very exciting.
Yeah, the tactical change he made at half-time, which obviously helped Norwich win that game. Many said that. I mean, I wasn't at the game, so I'm relying on people who've told me this, and obviously my colleagues who were there. It maybe felt a little bit fortunate that they were level at the break. The second half, Smith obviously changed things, and that helped Norwich get a bit more of a foothold in the game. Like I said there, he's going to have had a full week of training before this game. Does that give you more optimism on top of the optimism that you already have, given what he managed to do with those players in such a short space of time?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I suppose you could say we were fortunate in the first half. However, I think as a defence, our defence really held out really well. And that's one of the main things he talked about from the first interview was being more organised in defence, being harder to beat, and that was something that we showed in the first half, because that is a sign of a good team. Teams who don't necessarily play well but still don't concede, which was the most important thing. And I'll be honest, even at half time, because I saw Josh Sargent warming up in his kit, so I think it was pretty obvious he was coming on. But even I was a bit like, "Oh, are you sure about that one?" Given, because I'll be honest, he's not played his best in the last few games that we've seen him, but absolutely outstanding choice in substitution. He worked extremely hard, and obviously changed formation as well. Went to straight kind of what seemed like a 4-4-2, and the balance of it just worked perfectly. And that's something I think we've really missed over the last, even just like since last season. There'd be times when we'd be losing in a match, and the substitutions, it wouldn't be substitutions that would change the match. Even with, like I said, even when we're losing, we would just get like for like substitutions, which would do nothing to impact the match. And obviously, you know that one of the biggest things when it comes to substitutions is how late we've seen them. Even on the seasons that we were doing well, it was still a frustrating subject. But to see the substitution and the tactical change at half time, see it implemented so well, and to see it pay off, it was a really exciting moment. And I only hope that we see more of that coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. It is certainly an exciting time, I think, in terms of Norwich City, and interest as well to see what Dean Smith can do. It's been effectively, hasn't it, 4.5 years since Norwich had someone different to Daniel Farker in the dugout. So I think that adds an element of mystery as well. And that was the case, Liam, for Wolves as well this summer. The first time in a few years that they'd have a new manager at the helm. Bruno Lage, obviously the man replacing Nuno Espirito Santo, who subsequently went to Spurs and has since gone again. That transition between the two, I mean, you kind of touched upon it earlier about Bruno maybe hoping to change the style of play a little bit. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that looks like? Because I think people have an image of what a Wolves side under Nuno looked like. So what's the differences between that side and the one that Bruno is leading this season?
Yeah, Nuno, I mean, firstly, it's important to note that he, certainly in my lifetime, is, you know, the best Wolves manager, you know, they've had for at least, you know, 2, 3, maybe 4 decades. A wonderful, wonderful manager, very highly regarded at Wolves. But last season, you know, he had the injury to Raul Jimenez, of course, was a major factor. Other injuries elsewhere as well. And, you know, he tried to change the style. He tried to have Wolves a more attacking front foot style, and he couldn't quite make it happen. I think the injuries were, as I say, a big factor in that. From the new year onwards, he sort of went back to how they played before, but perhaps even more conservative than previously. You know, they were very. It was quite dull, to be honest. I think it's fair to say, and that resulted in the 13th place finish after 2 7th places in the 2 years before that. So it felt like the right time to change, albeit he was obviously brilliant for Wolves. And Bruno's come in. He's working with largely the same squad. You know, they've only had a few changes to that, but he wants Wolves to first of all press much more aggressively, be higher up the pitch. He's tried to move the defence a good 5, even at some games 10 yards higher up the pitch than they were under Nuno, and then also play out from the back. So, you know, we're getting Jose Sarr to play out to the defenders, provided they aren't pressed highly, which some teams have done this season and actually stopped Wolves from playing, which is Leeds and Palace being 2 examples rather, which, you know, Wolves struggled against. But when they can, they're playing out from the back. They're trying to keep hold of possession a lot more, play in between the lines, particularly the 2 wingers either side of Raul Jimenez, to become sort of quite narrow in between the lines and pick the ball up, and then make the passes out to the wing backs, get the ball into Raul Jimenez early. And it's worked on the whole. It's worked quite well. But these are the same players that, albeit, you know, modern footballers are very intelligent these days, and, you know, they're very good athletes. For 4 years, they were working in a very certain way, and now all of a sudden they're trying to change it. That's why, for example, he hasn't changed everything all at once. The formation is still largely the same, 3-4-3. Certain ways of sort of transitioning the ball are slightly similar, but overall he wants to make it a lot quicker going forward and look after the ball a lot more. He's made a big point, speaking to me and other colleagues, about, you know, when we don't have the ball, we struggle. I mentioned again the Palace game. Palace dominated possession, overran Wolves in midfield, and Wolves couldn't get hold of the ball, and as a result, they couldn't make anything happen. Wolves play their best in this system under Bruno when they have possession. They did that against West Ham and were brilliant, and Bruno knows that, and that's why he's trying to change the way they play slightly, and that's where the midfield comes into it. Coutinho and Neves have been criticised in previous seasons for not being quite the right pairing, and this year, on the whole, probably 90% of the time, have been very, very good, and particularly against West Ham, were outstanding. So if Wolves can get ticking in midfield, get the ball out to them fairly comfortably without being pressed too high, that's where they cause problems.
It's interesting what you've said there in terms of a new manager coming in and not completely ripping up the work of their predecessor, because as Anna has touched upon, and as Norwich fans have mentioned as well, it's probably the boat that Dean Smith is in at the moment as well, where you're trying to improve things without maybe completely ripping up the foundations. We see kind of head coaches or managers walk into a new club, try to completely change everything, and that goes completely wrong, or it can go completely right. So is that to his credit? Are Wolves fans quite pleased that he's kept the structure and maybe not tried to change too much too quickly?
I think so, yeah. It's all depends on the circumstance and the context with each club, and with Wolves particularly. As I said, they had 4 years of 4 very solid years with Nuno, a very particular way of playing, a particular style, how he went about himself, speaking with the players, the media, everything was very as it was with him. So then to have an unexpected change and have it all change very quickly, I think Bruno's been smart in not ripping everything up, as you say. A lot of fans were concerned about sticking with 3-4-3 because of what we'd seen under Nuno, but he made it very clear that we don't have to be a defensive unit, although we're playing arguably 5 defenders. Saying that, Semedo and at the moment Ait-Nouri, who's playing on both wing-back roles, have been very forward-thinking, very attacking. Again, I'll use the West Ham game as an example. I think Semedo in the first half on average positions was the furthest player forward. So when they get them playing and get them further up the pitch and get them making that width, allowing the other 2 wingers to come inside and get closer to Jimenez, that's when they're at their best. And as I say, particularly with when they've got possession as well. So yeah, it's to Bruno's credit, I think, because he came from Benfica with a reputation. Obviously, he had a bit of a gap in between, but when he was Benfica manager, with a reputation of playing very, very attacking football, a record goals haul over in Portugal, getting 3, 4, 5 goals a game, playing a 4-4-2 or an adaptation of that, a 4-2-3-1, a 4-2-2-2, something of that ilk, and being very forward-thinking. Came to Wolves, played 4-4-2, 4-2-3-1 in his early pre-season games, had a couple injuries, very quickly moved to 3-4-3, and since then nothing's changed. I think partly to do with that is the fact that he doesn't quite have the players he probably wants to change formation, particularly in defence. And I think he needs to make the team his own in terms of the personnel, and he will make changes to that. But with what he's got, he's kept a few things from Nuno, the formation being the big one, and he's trying to change the way they're playing as best he can. And so far, I think he's getting the best of both worlds, because although Wolves aren't scoring masses and masses of goals, they're grinding results out, playing some nice football at the same time. And at the moment, Wolves fans are getting quite excited about it, particularly if they can make some additions in January.
Of course, the other Norwich City news this week, apart from a home win, the first Premier League home win since before, obviously, the world change, so to speak, is the fact that Norwich City have unveiled their new crest, which I'll flash up on the screen now. Anna, I'm going to come to you first, but I am going to come to Liam as well on this, because I'm quite intrigued to get an outside perspective as well. So, Anna, let's come to you first. As a Norwich fan, you obviously see the new crest, which is going to come into force in June next year. What are your thoughts on it first and foremost? It's the club very keen for it to be seen as evolution rather than revolution. So let's kind of hear your thoughts.
Well, I hate to be terribly boring about it, but I'm honestly quite indifferent. I mean, I'm with a lot of people going, it's all right. I mean, especially with the line, I will say you don't quite realise just how odd the lion looked until there was a great focus on it, and then you actually go, hang on a minute, it is actually a bit weird looking. I mean, as a picture of it, I think it's hard to get used to. I think it'll probably feel a lot better and look a lot nicer once we actually see it on the kit. and see it in force. But I mean, I'm glad that they didn't kind of rip it up start again. We all know what happened with the Leeds badge. We don't want that kind of situation. But I mean, the castle, the lion, that looks nice. My only issue is it looks a little bit undefined, but like I said, it's hard to really fully judge it from a picture. I think it'll look a lot nicer once we see it on the kit.
Yeah, agreed. It is interesting when you see it, and I was fortunate enough to see some of the other designs, which were very much a lot of change, and for the most part were pretty horrendous. There's a lot of pieces on PinkUn.com that you can go and read about this. Liam, I'm keen to get an external view, because I believe the company that Norwich used to help redesign their badge also featured in kind of Wolves redesign. So what are your thoughts on that? I'll flash it up again so you can see it. It might completely have passed you by this week, totally understandably, because as Anna said, it's not a massive change. But what are your thoughts on kind of that?
Yeah, I did see it in the week, actually. I actually quite like it. I think I totally agree, actually, with Anna, that you need to see it on the kit first. But I think once you do, I think it'll look quite smart. I think it's simple and quite sort of refined, which I quite like. And the fact that it's not too dissimilar from the current badge is a good thing, because, as you mentioned, Wolves have gone through a few changes over the years, but it's been every off the top of my head, every decade, couple of decades or so, there's been changes. If you compare the Wolves one now to Wolves in the 50s, for example, it's very different, but it's gone through subtle changes in the last few editions of it, and for that one, Norwich, I think it is fairly subtle, really, in the sense that it's quite simple, quite refined, and I quite like it. I think it looks smart on a shirt, depending on the sponsor and all that as well. Because if the sponsor's massive, and which has been some Wolves fans' complaints with our shirts, is that the sponsor's a bit big and a bit overbearing. So if the sponsor's right as well, I think it could look quite nice, actually.
I will say I saw it for the first time probably a couple of months ago, and was a bit sort of, the Alan Partridge gif where he kind of shrugs his shoulders. But I must admit, having seen it a lot more this week, it has grown on me a little bit. So I think you could be right, and I think it could be a little bit of a grower. But yeah, I'd love to know your guys' thoughts of the badge as well. I think we've had lots of it on social media, but feel free to use the comments and get in touch with us through all the usual ways. Anna, back to the football then. A big sort of talking point last weekend or before the game was about whether Dean Smith would reinstate two players in particular, Billy Gilmour and Todd Campbell. Both came in, both had sort of different impacts on the game. We saw Todd Campbell, as you mentioned earlier, taken off at half time and looking a little bit off the pace. And I think Dean Smith admitted that in his post-match interview. Billy Gilmour, who maybe had a reverse effect, didn't play too well in the first half, but certainly came into it a lot more in the second. So what did you make of that decision to bring those two back in? Obviously, a lot of hype around both of them. Was that right? I guess around Todd Campbell as well. What do you think Dean Smith will do with him this weekend after obviously taking him off at half-time last week?
I think it was a bit of a surprise to see Campbell in, not because I don't like him or he's a bad player, just because obviously we know he's been out of favour for quite a while. There's been a number of training sessions that he's missed in the last couple of months. He hasn't really had a lot of game time, and especially when we saw him in the under-23s, he still looked particularly off pace. So I think it was a bit of a surprise. I think that he's a very good player. We all know that. So I wouldn't see him starting against Wolves. However, I think it could be really good to have him on the bench, somebody who could come out on over the next couple of games, get 20 minutes, 30 minutes here and there, because I think with a bit more game time, he'll look really good. And he was one of the, obviously there wasn't a lot, but last time round in the Premier League, we saw what he could do. He did really well, and he was one of the standout players. So we know what he can do in the Premier League. We just need to get him back up to pace again, because we know he can do it. I think with Billy Gilmour, the way he looked in the second half, and even without having his best game in the first half, there were still some really great moments. So just seeing that, it's hard to understand why he wasn't being played, but I think that game in itself has just cemented him in the starting lineup for the rest of the season, unless he does something terrible. He looked really good and added a really nice amount of balance to the side and really pushed forward as well, which has been something that we've all wanted for a while. And it was nice to see players not hanging around and kind of pushing forward, and he was certainly one of them. And I look forward to seeing what else he can do.
Obviously, Josh Sargent made a real impact last weekend from the bench. He's been an interesting one this season because he had a fairly bright start. The games obviously in the League Cup where he scored twice against Bournemouth. We also had that game against Watford where he played slightly on the right of Pukki and looked pretty good. And then we saw him move up front, and that didn't really quite work out. And then we saw him on the bench again, and now we've seen him come on, play on the right again, and look really quite effective. So, is he now back in the thinking for a starting spot, given what we've said about Todd and what Dean Smith has said about Todd maybe not being quite ready just yet and maybe needing a few more weeks of just getting up to kind of match speed? Does Josh Sargent now come to the fore in terms of the thinking for this weekend?
It's difficult to know. Obviously, he'll get more of an idea of who he wants in the side after having a full week. And in a lot of the time, I don't always agree with the keeping a winning side and not changing. I think there are times when you have to adapt to who your opposition is. So I think that'll be interesting. And I think that he's certainly in with a shout because, like I said, I was doubting the reason for the substitution, or at least substituting him on at half-time, but I was pretty quickly shut up after seeing the things he was doing. He might obviously not scored a goal or anything, but I was very much impressed with how hard he worked and how quickly he was tracking back. If he lost the ball, he went and got it back really quickly. He was fighting and scrapping for every ball. He was supporting his other teammates, and he was just generally working really hard, which is something that all of us fans have wanted for a long time. We understand that you can't win everything in the world. I mean, thankfully we did win, but at the very least, as fans, we want to see that fight and that desire and that passion. And it seemed like he really spurred a lot of the other players on to fight in that half, and it was really great to see. And I hope we keep seeing that from him.
Yeah, he emptied the tank, didn't he? That's for sure. Liam, to come back to you, I want to ask you a bit about Raul Jimenez. Obviously, had a really career-threatening injury. Probably realistically, that's fair to say. He's come back into the side. He's got 3 goals again this season. I mean, sort of park everything from a football perspective. It must be really nice for Wolves fans just to see him back on the pitch.
Yeah, definitely. Career-threatening, certainly, but he spoke to us earlier in the season, and it was life-threatening as well. He had surgery quite swiftly after the fractured skull away at Arsenal, and had that surgery not come as quick and had been as successful as it was, he could have lost his life as well. So it was great to see him, first of all, healthy. Back, I think it was 3 weeks later, he was pictured walking around the training ground, obviously not training, but back out again and walking and talking, and slowly but surely he's progressed and recovered, and has actually recovered really well, come into pre-season and done okay. It took a little bit of time to get up to speed in the Premier League, but as you say, from just a humanity point of view, nice to see him back. Personal point of view, it's lovely because he's got a young family as well. So from a football point of view, it's great to see him in the form he's in right now as well. He was great against West Ham. He's had a few good games here and there, scored a couple of goals. He's got 3 so far. To have him back on the pitch is a miracle, really. But to have him back playing as well as he is now, linking up as well as he is with the players around him, particularly Hwang Hee-chan, it's brilliant. Not only from Wolves benefiting as a football club, and he's massively important to that team and the way they play, but also, as I say, for him as a person, as a man, and having a young family. It's nice to see him back and out there again. He's a massive fan favourite with Wolves. They sing the songs, they've got the flags. He's loved there, and that's how he settled so well. Because if you look at his career, he's 30 now. I think he's 31 in May, and for the majority of his career, he's been a bench player, really. Atletico Madrid, Benfica. He's really not had a proper manager who's trusted him to go out there and have a real go at it. He's come to Wolves and hit the ground running, and the fans, he's adored by the Wolves fans. So that's a massive part of how he's done so well here, and it's so for that to have happened to him and the fans to be with him, it's great to have him back.
Wolves have obviously come up against the Dean Smith side earlier on this season. It was a fairly dramatic game, wasn't it? Wolves came back to win that 3-2 in sort of the final 15 minutes. It was quite a sucker punch for Dean Smith, who was in charge of Aston Villa at the time. Talk to us a little bit about that game firstly, and then as maybe an additional point, is that an advantage to Norwich that they have someone in the dugout who's sort of undergone that experience, or isn't it an advantage to Wolves who will kind of know what to expect from a Dean Smith side?
On that second point, probably a little bit of both, actually. I think Dean Smith's a very good coach. I think he's almost a sort of classic old school manager with a bit of a modern twist. And I do think he's was probably a bit unlucky to be let go from Villa at the time he was, to be honest. And I earlier in my career used to cover Walsall, and it was after rather. Dean was there, but having spoke to people there, he was very highly thought. I did a great job there, and of course, did a good job at Brentford as well. So I do think it's a bit of both on that regard. And regarding the Villa game, that was arguably one of the mistakes really of Bruno's reign so far at Wolves. Raul Jimenez had very little time to prepare, having come back from international duty with Mexico, and was benched for that game. Wolves changed to a 3-5-2, played three in midfield, and played Hwang and Adama Traore up top together. And it didn't work. You know, Traore had a few opportunities, but they were created purely from his pace and power that we know he's got, and created that on his own. Wolves, to be honest, for 80 minutes were very, very poor. Deserved to be 2-0 down, and looked like they were getting nowhere near a result. Managed to get a scrappy goal in the 80th minute, and from there they had a lot of the momentum, and you know, got another two. A bit of luck, of course, but managed to get the goals and got a good win. The problems that Dean Smith's Villa in that game caused Wolves was, again, the same problems we've seen against other teams. And Palace, again, as I mentioned, they pressed high, won the ball back in the transition quickly, stopped Wolves from playing out from the back, and stopped Wolves from getting the ball forward quickly. And that's how, you know, Wolves were nullified for 80 minutes. It'd be interesting to see if Dean Smith makes any changes to how he approaches this game. Of course, with a different squad, he's going to have to make some changes, but it'd be interesting to see if he makes any changes considering the Wolves fight back in that game, and how he's going to nullify that, because I'll be surprised if Wolves don't play 3-4-3 again, albeit Norwich did play three midfielders, at least for the first half against Southampton. And if they overrun the two for Wolves, and Billy Gilmour starts to get on the ball and starts to pass it around like we know he can, then that's where Norwich could cause Wolves some problems. So yeah, it's certainly a bit of a tactical battle, and Bruno's got some wrong, some right this season. I'll give him his credit. West Ham, he got it spot on. But the away form, as I mentioned, is a little bit iffy this season, so it'd be certainly an interesting one.
Anna, let's come to you first then. Optimism probably in the air for Norwich City at the moment. How do you see this one going? And then, of course, let's have your score prediction as well.
I think it's going to be a difficult one. Nobody's under any illusions there. It's going to be tough. But with these kind of teams, what you don't want to see your team doing is sitting back, defending deeply, all that kind of stuff. And kind of, because when you do that, you're just inviting that kind of pressure. We always see with the biggest teams, maybe the top six teams, that if you want to get a result, if you want some kind of win or a draw at the very least, then you have to go at them. You have to press them high. You have to stop them from playing, and you have to almost be that surprise. And I think we have the ability to do that, and we've got a boost now. We've got new manager. We've got a couple of wins. We'll be feeling good with that. We should go out there with some confidence, and I know that we're not going to rule out any matches. We're going to see it as 3 points, regardless of possibility, regardless of who we play now, which is really nice to see. And I think that at home, it's definitely a good chance for 3 points. We've just got to go for it. And I think that as tough as I think it's going to be, I'm going to go for a horrible 1-0 to Norwich.
Good stuff. We'd certainly take that, Anna. That's for sure. Liam, I'll throw the same question over to you as well. How do you see this one going? And then let's have your score prediction as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors sort of going in some ways against Wolves, actually. You know, the fact that Norwich have hit their best form of the season, a new manager, who I think is a good manager as well, as I mentioned. Wolves' away form not quite being what it should be. But as Anna say, if Norwich sit back and allow Wolves to keep the ball, dictate the play, get on the front foot, I think the quality Wolves have got going forward, and particularly how solid they have been actually in defence for the vast majority of the season. I think they've got too much for Norwich, or they should have too much, but that's only if Wolves can get playing and wake up quickly, because they've been guilty of some slow starts, even against West Ham in a game they dominated. For the first 10 or 15, arguably, they were a little bit asleep. So if they can wake up quickly, get playing, get moving, they do have too much quality, I think, not to win the game. But that's a lot of ifs and buts. If it does happen, I'll go 2-0 Wolves.
Lovely stuff. Our thanks to Anna and Liam for joining us this weekend. Our thanks to you as well for watching as ever. We're going to try and produce one for Newcastle, which is next Tuesday, but the turnaround might be a bit tight. So if not, then we'll definitely see you back for Spurs. We're reaching a sort of a fortnight where there's a really intense block of games now for Norwich City, which of course is good as we get into the Christmas schedule of things. PinkUn.com, of course, the place to go. We'll be at Carrow Road on Saturday to bring you all the updates, analysis and reaction from this game as well. It's certainly going to be an interesting one. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again very soon.